Okay, let's get down to the topic of today, life transitions, and specifically one that's very near and dear to my heart, the midlife transition. I think we all go through these more than once in our life. Sometimes they can be incredibly growing experiences where we come out and we're in a really tremendously enriched state, but other times we can get stuck where we feel like we've been punched in the stomach and we don't know how to move forward. So I think it's important that we understand what these are and what we can do as we encounter them. So, Bryson, let's start with what is the definition, and maybe definition is the wrong word, but what is a midlife transition from the perspective of the neuroscience lens? Like, what is that? What's going on in the body, in the mind, in the brain?
Yeah, well, do you want to start first with the neuropsychology or with the neurobiology? Because they both sync up and they're both very very applicable here. But which direction do you want to approach this topic from first?
I think psychology because I think for most people they think of it as a state of mind and maybe more digestible than going the other way.
Okay, sweet. Um, so first of all, one of the greatest motivators that we have is to live according to who we believe we are. It's our identity, right? And one of the really tricky things with these transitions, and honestly, I would even define these transitions by this, is that all of a sudden our identity shifts. Who we thought we were is no longer, or at least in our mind, who we are now. So somebody pointed out recently that this is why dogs don't like getting a bath, is because they have this identity crisis because they're used to their own smell, and after a bath they no longer smell like themselves, and so they freak out because it's like, who am I? Am I even still here? What, like, and whether that's true or not, I think it highlights an important point that these transitions in life, whether a negative event or a positive event, they fundamentally shift our understanding and perception of who we are. So, for example, losing a spouse, whether that's divorce or death or anything like that, all of a sudden, our understanding of who we were is challenged and sometimes completely ripped out from underneath us. That foundation that we are standing on. Who am I without this person? Who am I without this
Mm.
relationship? And on the converse, with something positive, like getting married, all of a sudden I'm no longer just me. My identity is now this combined relationship. And that's challenging and that's stressful. And obviously we go into these relationships willingly, but it still requires this level of reevaluation and figuring out again who we are and what our
Yeah.
identity is. Same thing with losing a child, whether it's gaining a newborn into your family or a child dying. Either way, there's this transition where we have to figure out, who am I and what is my role in life and what are my priorities. All of that changed drastically. And that's a stressful, draining process. It can be good stress or it can be bad stress, depending on how we choose to approach it. So every single transition in life is going to include some aspect of changing our understanding of our identity. And that could be new job, divorce, new marriage, moving to another state, a life changing injury where you can no longer do your hobbies like you used to. Or maybe you move somewhere where, like you used to be a surfer and now you moved to Oklahoma. Like, who am I if I'm not a surfer?
Yeah.
But then we have these special kind of transitions that happen more in the middle of our life. And this is where the neurobiology comes in. Independent of whether there's this huge external event, there's a certain shift that starts happening in the middle of our life. For everybody, it's a little bit different. It usually doesn't happen in our early 20s. Sometimes it happens more mid, late 20s. But I would say usually by our 50s, this shift has happened. Our, our brain adjusts how it processes and interprets events. The dopamine system, which is responsible for pleasure and motivation and drive, is also responsible for risk taking behavior. It's responsible for kind of external reward and fulfillment. And this dopamine system, this specific system, is very, very active in our early life, from our teens through our 20s. So this is why, we're looking for the high paying career and the sports car and the fun, exciting hobbies. But then as this system kind of lowers its intensity and switches over to some other systems that I'll explain in just a second, we lose that drive for this external reward and external validation of who we are. This is where identity starts to shift. And we call this the dopamine plateau. This fundamentally changes where our priorities are. And this is where people start to question what they're doing and why they're doing it. Instead of it just being a switch in, oh, I have this new role in life as a new father or as a new spouse, all of a sudden we're questioning the roles altogether. Instead of it being, what is this role going to do for me and how am I going to be externally rewarded and validated as I fulfill this role, we're starting to question the purpose of the role and the existence of the role. And some people take this to this nihilistic point where nothing matters. Like if this doesn't matter, then I'm just not even going to care about it. And I would encourage against that. This is a chance to reevaluate and re-internalize what we're focusing on and what is most important. This is why people that die in the later years of their life are sitting on their bed saying, I wish I had done this more. I wish I had been a better father. I wish I'd spent more time with my family. Young people, when they die in their 20s, they're not thinking those same things. I wish I'd spent more time with my family, because their brain is still geared towards that external reward and that risk-taking behavior.
You said a couple of really important things there that I think are important. Number one, you talked about events, external events and internal events. And I think that's a really important thing to highlight, because a lot of the transitions that we feel earlier in life are things like losing a job, maybe getting a new job, breaking up of relationships. Maybe it's something more tragic, like the loss of a parent. Big things that happen in life, and these things are external. They happen, they impact us. But I think with the midlife crisis, that midlife transition, for me, it wasn't triggered by one event. It was like a slow orchestra playing in the background, like the Titanic going down, but the volume slowly kind of kept creeping up. And what was interesting is that the responses that I would use as a younger person, that dopamine fix, the hedonistic treadmill, buying cars, getting the next job, more money, going out with my buddies, chasing more fun, weren't working anymore. As a matter of fact, they were compounding it because I didn't have the physical or mental stamina to keep it up. So it was actually making the situation worse. So I think that's a really key point to make, is that, those earlier events that you described where the dopamine pathway is still, primarily driving our behavior. It's a dramatically different thing when you hit that midlife transition, because you can buy all the sports cars you want. You're just fooling yourself. It's only a matter of time. The second thing that you said that I thought was really important is this idea of labels, our identity. I'm a mother, I'm a father, I'm a professional, I'm the captain of the football team. And when those labels change, we feel like someone has taken our official uniform off, and we feel uncomfortable with it. How much of that is what we would call a label versus what we would call ourselves or our true identity? I want to point that out, because we talk about it even when we work with people. we have labels, but is that our true identity? Is that truly who we are when you take off all the experiences and we figure out the person that we want to be? Is there a difference between the identity driven, the label driven identity, and who we truly are?
That's a super good question. When it comes to identity and how our identity is tied to our experiences, there's two different modes, two different kind of paths that we can take. In fact, this is kind of a new. It's a similar approach and way of thinking as Carol Dweck's growth mindset versus fixed mindset, but a little more identity and experience based. We either have our identity defined by our experiences, or our identity is just shaped by our experiences. And so those sound very similar, so let me break it down. Identity defined or experience defined identity is the person who played football in college, and that's what they continue to talk about. That is their identity. They're holding on to that experience, and that is who they are. It's very, very external. The experience shaped identity is when someone takes what they have learned and what they've gone through and the different roles that they've had or currently have and use that as a lens to better understand who they are. So the person, as someone who has an experience shaped identity, even if they played or they played football in college, they see that as a way to better understand themselves. They're like, I'm driven. I love a good challenge, and I love this competitive nature, and I love being part of a team. That's who I am. Those qualities and characteristics might look different in different stages of my life, but I understand that that is who I am. So now I can go on to be part of a corporate team and take everything I learned from that past experience and bring it with me into this new role. And I understand that this new role is just something that I'm stepping into, and then I'm going to step out. Maybe when I retire, maybe when I switch jobs. But that's not who I am. And this is one of the reasons why people end up having these midlife crises. A crisis being a little more intense than just a transition. It's a little more sudden, and it's usually external. Someone doesn't have a slow onset of a midlife crisis. They might have a slow onset of a midlife transition, but when there's a crisis, it's because the foundation that they're standing on got ripped out from underneath them, and now all of a sudden nothing is certain. Professional athletes that have a career-ending injury, or losing your job when that was who you were. You're like, I am the CFO of this Fortune 500 company, and then now all of a sudden I lose my job. I don't know who I am anymore. But someone who has that job as a CFO of a Fortune 500 company, who understands that their identity is not based on what they do or what they have done, but that their identity is understood through what they've done and through what they do. They're going to be able to have a much smoother transition. It's still going to be hard. Like, I'm not going to say that losing your job is going to be easy when you understand who you are, but you're able to take that and move on faster. The transition doesn't last as long, and you're able to gain more from it.
We have these labels that we all have in our life. I'm a father. I am a CIO. I am a hockey player. I consider those labels. But each one of those roles, or these labels, allows me to do things that bring me joy or pleasure. As a hockey player, I love being around a team. As a CIO, I love solving problems and working with my leadership team. As a father, I love engaging with my kids, watching them grow. So there's the concept of the label, which changes. When you lose your job, you're no longer the CEO. But I think what you're saying is that there's qualities that you have, or that you were part. I'm trying to word this the right way. There were
Mhm.
attributes that you enjoyed, that brought you joy. I was a leader, but what I really liked was working with people.
Mhm.
I was a hockey player, but what I really liked was the process of getting stronger and fitter. I had good work ethic. I loved that process of going to the gym. And I think maybe what you're saying is that when you start to look at, when you look below the label, you're going to find those things that really you loved and those things that you didn't like so much about the label. And it's okay to lose that, but you
Yeah.
want to trap those things that bring you joy, that motivate you, that excite you, and maybe re-image them into the person you want to become. So it's like a massive filter as we go through life. You pick up these experiences. Listen, I ran a marathon. I didn't love running 26.2 miles, but I loved the process of getting fitter, the commitment. I loved feeling myself getting stronger. So you're not a marathon runner, but you are a runner, and you enjoy that the experience of running. And I really like the way you described it, because when we go through these transitions, it's almost a time to reflect, to say, what did I love about that version of myself? What did I
Mhm.
love about that phase in my life? And what didn't I like? And I guess in a sense, that's really figuring out what your true identity is, at least going into the next phase of your life, and maybe what your purpose is as well. It might give you a bit of an idea of what that purpose is. Is that accurate?
Yeah, absolutely 100%. It's like when the external gets ripped away from us, if we haven't been able to extract out what we are internally, we're left with nothing. This is the difference between someone who is able to retire from their job and thrive and be super fulfilled and have a really enjoyable life, and someone who is miserable and goes down addictive behavior pathways and loses their sense of who they are. If they have not been able to extract out what they truly are from this role and hold on to it as they go through these transitions, then when they get forced into this next role, whether that's unemployed, retired, new father, single father, new parent, or recently lost my only child, when they move into those new roles, they're going to struggle if they don't have something to hold on to. They're going to lose their sense of identity unless they were able to internalize who they are and why they love that so much. I played football in high school, and I don't consider myself a football player anymore. But there are things that I learned about my identity and who I truly am, the things that I like and things that I don't like, that now I can hold on to that. I'm no longer hurt and bothered by the fact that I can't play football anymore, because I understand that was something that I used to better understand myself. It's independent of what happens externally in our life. We're all going to go through that dopamine plateau where we're no longer looking outwards and now we start looking inwards. If we're prepared for this process, it can be an absolutely incredible experience. I feel like I've started to go down that path where these external things don't matter as much to me, and I'm starting to. There are questions that I have that I can't ignore anymore, and I think that's a really really good way of wording it that I think people will understand that these questions start building up and you can't ignore it anymore. It's part of your biology. Your dopamine is going to level out. You're not going to be looking externally as much. And so the question is, what do you do when you're not naturally focusing outward? When you naturally start to shift inward for meaning and purpose? Or do we have something built up already? Are we going to start looking for that, or are we just going to sit back and wait for that external motivation and that external sense of fulfillment to come back? If we do, that's when we're going to start looking for quick fixes, like social media likes and follows, addictive behavior, substance abuse, sexual addictions, even.
Yeah.
That's why it's so important to start establishing this. If you can start it before your 20s are over, awesome. If not, the next best time to start that is right now,
Yeah.
because we're going to go through it, or we have gone through it, and it's so much better to take a more deliberate approach with that. Otherwise, like we can come back from it. The question is, how much suffering do we want versus how much fulfillment do we want? We have to choose
Yeah.
one or the other.
It's super interesting. And I think to bring this point home, you know, when I started my journey, and I would say it started for me when I was around 35, 40, I started to feel that voice.
Mm-hmm.
And instead of listening to it, I try to game it. I try to gamify it. I started quitting jobs and looking for new jobs. I bought a motorcycle, more than one motorcycle actually. I even did the infamous convertible route. Lost a lot of friends, damaged a lot of relationships, almost ended my marriage, really destructive behavior. And it wasn't even conscious. It was like I just felt I was the tail, and this thing that was going on was the dog, and it was just waving me around, and I was responding to it. But after each move, buying the bike, buying the car, starting a new job, I realized it offered me temporary relief. Going back to the dopamine,
Yeah.
the first hit's always the best hit. Everything else after that declined.
Yeah.
Then I woke up one day and said, this isn't working. And I went on what we now know was these crazy endurance events. And I think it was in the moments of silence, whether I was running through the Rockies or cycling through Canada, that I actually started to say, Matt, you're not looking for a new title. You're not looking for a new car. You're looking to become the person who you really want to be, or who you're meant to be, that underlying identity. And, you know, we hear it all the time. Rock stars that buy cars, big mansions, yet drink themselves to death. And I think that's the route I was heading on. And when I started to really dig deeper and understand what I loved about my career, what I loved about my profession, I extracted those out and I moved them forward with me. But I left the things that weren't working for me anymore, and I started to re-image myself in this new identity. I love helping people. I love learning things. Now I read books voraciously about neuroscience and psychology, and I figure out a way to apply that to people's lives to help them. And then I have connections with people like you, and it grows. And it's through those embers that the fire starts to like ignite. And, you know, Carl Jung said, it's an awakening. Everything else up to 40 is dress rehearsal. And, the real show begins after 40 because we learn about ourselves in that first half. Now we get to apply the math and figure out life's problems. And it's an exciting time. So I think, we all get scared of this midlife crisis. It's scary. You feel stuck. You can't sleep. You have maybe some depression happening. You may be living your life unhealthy. Your fitness may be declining. There's a lot of things that are going on, but generally speaking, it's not a very comfortable thing to go through.
Yeah.
And you can get stuck. Like that's the biggest thing. So I have some input here, but I want to ask you, now that we know what a midlife crisis is, what it feels like, what are some of the things that you can recommend that are, more easily understood? Because I think we could go to the self-help bookstore and there's thousands of books and there's all this stuff online, but from a neuroscience perspective, what can you offer that people can latch onto and say, that's a really effective tool or strategy I can use to help me move through this transition?
I think the biggest thing is to understand that your brain is naturally shifting from looking outwards to looking inwards. It craves meaning and purpose. Before, it craved resources and risk and excitement and external fulfillment and validation. But now it craves something different. And I think if people are able to understand that that switch is going to happen whether they like it or not, and it might happen at different points for everybody in their own life, but it's going to happen. It's just part of our physiology. You can prepare for it, and you can start creating that purpose and that meaning and that internal sense of identity before you even hit your midlife crisis. And then we can just turn it into a midlife transition. It doesn't have to be this, oh, I just retired and now I have no idea who I am anymore, and everything I understood about my life is up for debate. We don't have to wait for that crisis to happen. We can prepare ahead of time so that it's just a transition. It's just a shifting and a refocusing of what matters most to us. And those that are already in that midlife crisis, you can take those same steps now to get out of that. So what does that look like? One, I would start with figuring out if you are in a transition or if you're in a crisis. Is my external behavior detrimental to my health, or am I figuring things out? Because those two can sometimes look very similar on the surface, but they are often very, very different when we get down to the roots. And honestly, this sounds so simple, but one of the best tools we've come across in neuroscience is journaling. It's how we take nebulous thoughts and feelings and turn them into concrete sentences and ideas that we can understand and that we can process. And we might think we understand something until we have to sit down and write it out. Anytime I'm going through a transition or I'm trying to figure out where my feelings are at, I journal. I write it down, and there hasn't been a single time that hasn't worked for me. And my brain isn't unique. I have a brain just like everybody else. It operates off the same physiological principles, and it works. Ask yourself questions. Ask yourself questions and then write and journal the answers to those questions. You'll be surprised at what comes up. Ask yourself questions like, why did I enjoy this job so much or this role so much? What do I want to continue, or what do I want to pull from that experience and take with me going forward? What is most important to me? If I could live my life any way I wanted to, what would that look like? Ask those deeper, more non-specific answers or questions that are going to get your brain thinking. If you don't know the answer right when you ask the question, that's a good question. If you already know the answer as soon as you ask yourself it, still write it down, but ask yourself a deeper question later. It's a really, really powerful exercise. I recently did it just for this new stage of my business career and trying to figure out what direction do I want to take myself in and why. Because once I figure out that why, not only do I understand myself better, but I'm able to take actions aligned with who I am and what matters most to me. So to sum that up, understand that your brain is going to make this shift at some point. If it already hasn't, it will soon. And you can prepare for that shift by internalizing your focus and your sense of identity and extracting what is meaningful and important to you. If you're already in that crisis, you can take those same steps to get out of that crisis and figure out who you are and who are you without all those external roles and labels. And journaling is a powerful tool for doing that. And don't worry about not knowing how to do it perfectly. Just start. You'll figure it out. Your brain is a pretty powerful, incredible tool. It knows what you need to be doing right now.
Yeah. It's super interesting. And a couple of things that I've learned from you. Our brain, whether we're 8 years old or 48 years old, always has the potential to change. It always has the potential to learn. That's what neuroplasticity is. So we have some agency where we can follow certain strategies, leverage certain tools to actually help that along. We can actually change the way we think, the way we feel. We can change our state. But one of the things I want to like highlight is that so often when we look at social media and we look at self-help books and we look at all these different programs, it's kind of hard to figure out what works, what doesn't, how you bring this all together and create a plan. And I'll go back to the concept of fitness. You need a plan. You speak to your trainer, you set your goals, you understand where you want to go. Do you want to build muscle? Do you want to run faster? You write the plan, you execute the plan. I believe midlife transition, for me, I would say mine was more of a midlife crisis, but for me, what I was lacking was the playbook. And I think what we're starting to understand, and you just made the point, like it's coming, let's prepare for it. Mm-hmm. Everyone goes through this. Why we're so surprised and why we don't have the playbook is a surprise to me. But more importantly, why it's not tactical. Like why can't you just pick up the playbook and say, here are some of the things we can do. So for example, and I learned this from you, Bryson, if I looked at the dimensions of my life, I would say that certain things I'd want to evaluate as I was going through this transition would be things like my job, my relationships, my physical health, my mental health, and my purpose. And I would ask myself what's working in each one of those dimensions, and I would ask what is not working. And out of that analysis, I would come up with a bit of a scorecard. I need to change my job. I don't like my job. I need to fix this relationship. I need to get rid of that relationships. Mm-hmm. I don't like the way my body feels. I'm overweight. I feel sleepy. I'm tired. I would assess each one of these dimensions. I would figure out what's working, what's not working. And I think that would be great input into two things that we talk about in the program all the time. The vision statement, mm-hmm. where you want to go in life, the reality you want to create. Because when you know what that is, you now have a port to sail towards. And I think what I was missing was all this chaos. I didn't know. I was getting hit by all these pieces of information. But had I known to look at each one of those life dimensions, figure out what's working, what's not, out of that analysis, figure out what life I want to create, my vision, and the person I want to become, my identity, and put that into a tactical plan. If you're not happy with the job, you don't have to cycle across Canada. Mm-hmm. Step one, maybe get some more education. Step two, start researching career shifts. Maybe you want to help people more. Maybe you want to become a volunteer. Maybe relationships aren't working. Go to a marriage counselor. Get a divorce. Like figure out what you want to do in each one of these areas and envision the life you want to create and the person you want to become, and then execute the plan to get there. And what I love about neuroscience is it removes the mystery of the brain. Mm-hmm. We can recruit the brain in the battle to achieve the life we want. We don't have to fight it. And I feel for me for so long, this gray monster was living inside me saying, hey, what you're doing, the life you're living and the person you are, it's not who you are. It's not the life you want. I try to trick it. I'll just buy a new car or I'll get a new job. But if we recruit what neuroscience tells us and we learn how to work with the mind, we can work towards the vision and we can work towards becoming that person we want to be. I don't know if you have anything more to add to that, but does that make sense? Kind of like looking at life through those dimensions and figuring out what's working, what's not. Is that the questions you were suggesting?
So absolutely. Having a vision is so important. We need a direction to move in. And when it comes to growth and change, there's two problems that a lot of people come across. One, they don't know exactly what they truly want. They don't know what their vision should be. And so they just say, like, I'll just do all the good habits and the good behaviors and I'll be moving in the right direction. Or they don't trust that what they've laid out as their vision is what they truly want. And that's all right. One, not having an end destination it means you're just going to be going in circles. If you don't know what type of fitness you want to have, well, do I run, or do I lift weights, or do I do yoga? You get stuck in this cycle of there's 100 different directions I can move in, and that's overwhelming and it's draining. And you start doubting any progress that you do make because you have nothing to measure if you're moving in the right direction. The other problem people come across is they don't think that they don't trust their vision. They might, they're like, yeah, this is a goal I could have, but I don't know if that's the goal I'm actually going to be moving in. And so they just don't even make any progress towards that. But what they don't realize is that it's moving towards a goal that you figure out if you're moving in the right direction. You say, okay, I'm unhealthy and I need to get in shape. I'm going to set a goal of being a marathon runner. I'm going to run a marathon. Cool. Now you have a direction. Now you have something to measure your actions against. I start going on runs. I start training. How does that feel? Oh, actually, it turns out I'm not a big fan of running. Like, I feel like I'm getting better, in better health and better shape, but I'm not as motivated towards that goal as I thought. Okay, now I need to reestablish and figure out what I do want. Okay, I want to lift weights, and so here's what I'm going to do, and here's how I'm going to hit all those goals. You start lifting weights, and you're like, actually, like I'm getting better shape, but this isn't. I don't feel as motivated. Okay, I'm going to join a local rec team to play soccer, and then that's when they figure out that's what they want to do, and then all of a sudden there's structure to their journey. It's like, okay, well, if I want to become a better soccer player, I need to do some cardio. I need to do some agility training. I need to strengthen my legs. I need to strengthen my core. All of a sudden now there is something for them to do. There is direction and there's purpose behind it. And instead of having this infinite amount of options and paths to go down, there's a single path. And that is powerful and that's motivating because now we have something to measure. Now we have something to motivate us, both in the I want to go towards this and also, wow, I'm making progress in this path. And
Yeah.
that's something our brain needs. And people don't realize it. And so they miss out on so much growth and progress because they are waiting for something to just show up to be the motivator, or they don't know what the motivator is yet. And so they just sit around waiting. And that
Yeah.
never works.
Yeah, I think it's a really important point to make because what's worse, being stuck or moving in the wrong direction? And there's no clear-cut action answer there, but what I will say is this. When I started to feel my midlife crisis, as I said, mine was a crisis. The first thing I will say is that my actions were destructive. I was serving myself in a very poor manner by ruining my career, damaging relationships, just behavior that wasn't aligned with who I truly am or who I want to be.
Mm-hmm.
And I got on my running shoes and I ran through the Rockies. And that gave me some clarity. But did it mean that my vision was to become an ultra runner and raise money for sick kids? A lot of it felt right, but some of it didn't feel so like, no, it's not really it. So what do? I hopped on my bike and I did this ride across Canada, not once, but twice. And what I'll say about this whole experience is this: moving somewhere was better than being stuck.
Yeah.
But what I will also say is that when you understand the concept of vision, it's a process of refinement.
Mm-hmm.
You create a vision to give you a prioritization on your life. I'm going to be prioritizing things that help me move in the direction of the vision that I want to create. I want to create that vision. This thing isn't helping me. I don't care about it. So it removes the clutter. So that vision is very important, and it can be refined.
Yeah.
And if you take one journey, you find some answers to questions, what worked, what didn't. And that's why I think it's so important that we have to treat this very tactically. because you could get so overwhelmed reading all these books and taking all these courses and taking all these journeys, especially as you look at it through the dimensions of your life, your career, your relationships, all these different things. You have to figure out a way of decomposing the problem
Yeah.
and building the plan out of that decomposition. Small actionable steps. And to your point, as you take a step towards the life you want or the identity you want to create, look at your KPI, the thing you're measuring: happiness, joy. I feel better about myself. Your mind and your heart and your soul will tell you you're moving in the right direction or you're not. And I think it's okay to take one wrong turn because it's going to bring you back to the right turn. The obstacle is the way. Sometimes when you find the obstacle, you know you're going the right way. And I think it's important that we don't be scared to experiment. If you want to be a painter, go take a painting class.
Yeah.
If you want to learn how to dance, go dance. Some things are going to resonate with you, some things aren't. But you need a plan. You need to execute the plan. You need to assess the results and figure out what you're measuring.
Yeah.
Is it happiness? Is it your physical health? Is it the quality of sleep? Like all these different things that dictate whether or not you're moving in the right direction, they can be measured. I'm happier. I feel better. I'm thriving. So I think it's a really cool kind of concept to think that, the human mind, the human body, we're projects. We are like a project. And we need to figure out what is the end state, what is the goal, what is the vision, what is the identity. We need to build the plan and we need to execute that plan. And what I love about neuroscience is it's like a tool I would use back in the day when I was a program manager. I'm going to bring in an architect because they can help us in this space. I'm going to bring in developers because they can help us in this space. And each person that we brought in brought a skill, a tool that would help us achieve the outcome of the project. Mm-hmm. We are very complex. We have a physical system. We have a mental system. We have an emotional system. And I think if we try to undertake transformation without respecting that complexity, we're going to fall short. And that's why I think things like neuroscience and the stuff that you bring to the table is so powerful, because for me it was the missing link. And I get very excited about bringing these components together to create this recipe for life, this recipe for transformation. And you can tell I'm a bit passionate about this stuff. but is that kind of how you look at it too? That we are like projects. We're very complex, and if we just fall on one thing, like I'm going to get really fit, or I'm gonna go on a diet, and or I'm going to quit my job. I think these like little one-offs don't work. They're a step forward, two steps back. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Well, and there's two things that come to mind. One, we are very, very complex individuals, multifaceted, and there's so much to our life experience. But that being said, the tools and the approach we use are going to be very simple. And I think people get lost in that. They're like, how are these simple things going to impact this complex experience? But the fact is, these simple things influence each of those individual aspects and sides of our person. And then with that, because we are complex individuals, the solution to these complex experiences isn't going to be a one-sided solution. Just going to therapy, that's going to help with just one side. That's not going to help with everything else. Just going to the gym isn't going to do it. Just trying to improve our relationship with our spouse isn't going to do it. What is going to be able to facilitate these multiplanar, multifaceted learning experiences is life experience. We can't improve our life by just reading about how to improve our life. We can't improve our life just by going to therapy, but we also can't improve our life just by going to the gym. We need complex experiences because we're complex individuals. But the thing is, we can take a simple experience and then bring in every other part of our life into it. So for me, going to the gym isn't just a physical experience. For me, it's a physical, emotional, neurological, psychological, relational experience. And because of that, I'm able to transfer what I learn and experience in the gym to all these other areas of my life. The ways that I improve my relationships, I can transfer that to every other area of my life. So the key is going out and getting experiences and then letting that experience be more than just this isolated part of our life. Because our brain doesn't think that way. Our brain doesn't operate in these segregated, times of our day. Everything influences everything else. So we have to let it influence everything else in our life.
Yeah.
So for you, you were, riding across Canada, you were trying to fix a specific problem, but you didn't realize that this experience had the potential to influence every part of your life. You went into it saying, I'm going to feel better emotionally when I do this thing. But what ended up happening was eventually you let it influence the rest of your life, and it impacted your relationship. It impacted your mental health. It impacted your physical health. It impacted your sense of fulfillment and also your career and what mattered to you. And so I think one of the keys is going back to what I originally said is understanding that complex problems are going to be solved with often quite simple solutions. And then letting experiences be more than just an isolated event in our life. Like career, yeah, we don't want to bring our homework or bring our work home with us, but we should bring our work experiences home with us. What we learn at the office should influence how we learn and adapt in our relationships. And my relationship with my significant other should influence how I approach my fitness. All of these things are connected, and that can sometimes be scary and overwhelming. But the cool thing is, our brain is so complex and it's so powerful. All we have to do is just let it, and it can do all that complex calculations and computations for us.
You've given us some super valuable advice. We've talked about the neuroscience. We've talked about putting this into a plan. That's kind of what Heroes Unleash helps people do. But in closing, is there anything else that you can think of that, any other sound bites that are powerful that can help people through these transitions?
Yeah, so when you realize that you are losing that external motivation and reward as our dopamine starts plateauing, understand that the solution isn't change the externals. Because just because this external stopped doing it for you doesn't mean that the next external will. It's simply a sign and an indicator that you need to start increasing the internal reward system, the internal fulfillment and meaning. Even if you're unhappy in your job now, and you're not feeling that external motivation and drive, that's just a sign that you can shift things internally to create more motivation and fulfillment. If you still do that and you're like, I know that I am internally fulfilled and I'm still not liking this job, yeah, take a switch then. Look for a different job. But don't get stuck in this cycle of trying to change all these external things. It might work for a little while, but if you don't establish that internal reward system and that internal drive and fulfillment, no external change is ever going to be enough, especially not in the long term. So just understand that as we get older, we intrinsically start looking for this internal meaning and purpose. It might happen super suddenly when there's a midlife crisis, or it might just be a slow transition that starts to build until we can't ignore it. But it does come, and it's just a sign that we need to start making that shift internally.
Wow. Fantastic stuff. I think we've pretty much dissected this very important topic. We've exposed a lot of the the issue, what lies beneath a midlife crisis or a life transition. I think we've described them, how they feel, why they happen, and more importantly, what we can do about them. So it's been awesome. Stay tuned. There's going to be many, many more conversations like this. I think, I mean, just today, we could talk probably for another 10 hours on related subjects. So thank you so much, Bryson. And I think if anybody has any questions, wants more information, obviously we're going to be sharing this information and more, but heroesunleashed.ca. Also register for our newsletter. I know Bryson's going to be contributing to a blog soon, so we look forward to that. Other than that, thank you, Bryson. It's been awesome.
Yeah, always a pleasure.